Hello, everyone. I'm Pooja Bothra, Senior Content Lead, ETHR World. A warm welcome to this fireside chat on a very topical theme, mapping the business impact of learning. It is my honor and privilege to introduce two titans of the online learning space, Dallas Krishnan of Coursera and Ritesh Dhuth of Byju's. They're changing the way that we consume knowledge, and this is especially true during the post-pandemic era. Ritesh is the Vice President of Engineering, leading the K3 Early Learning app with Vidyarth, which is Google plus Byju's platform at Byju's. An entrepreneurial leader with 22 plus years of experience in propelling world-class high technology product development initiatives. Ritesh currently leads the early education innovation at Byju's Technology Division, adept in ramping up new technologies. He proficiently leads ML and AI, cloud, web technologies, embedded networking products in all phases. Welcome to this fireside chat, Ritesh. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Pooja. Thank you, Pooja.
And Dallas Krishnan, MD for Coursera, India, Australia, and New Zealand. Dallas believes in enabling enterprises and universities to learn without limits through the Coursera platform. In his view, the power of lifelong learning and upskilling is critical to the digital transformation of companies. He has worked for leading organizations like Salesforce, Amazon Web Services, IBM, SAP, and he has worked extensively across India and APAC markets. Welcome to the Fireside Chat, Dallas. Glad to have you here.
Wonderful to be with you, Pooja, always. Thank you.
My first question is for Ritesh. Technology skill development is critical strategy for every organization. And since you lead Byju's early education and innovation, so I would like to ask you how you try to keep your workforce technologically updated to bring in innovation, or is this a challenge you face?
No, this is a great question, Pooja, because in this ever-changing time where technology is changing by the second, by an hour, it's very critical that we as an organization also keep in change with as to what's happening around, right? So let me start with essentially about Byju's in general. What it's essential, Byju's is the organization where we were a digital first company. Even at the time when the edtech sector was unheard of and mostly was offline, we were the pioneers to take it online, right? And in a way, you can believe that the technology and innovation is in our DNA. And owing to this reason, we were able to smoothly transition from an offline model to an online model. And one of the key things when we actually hire people, we always have that mission statement back of our mind to make children fall in love with learning. And when you have such mission and vision clear, you actually can excite a lot of people when you want to bring them on board in general. Now, specifically as to what do we do internally to keep people completely engaged as to what we're doing and make sure that they are up to speed and actually understand the technology trends, and we adopt those technology at a rapid pace internally to our own expansion on the digital footprint. So we definitely are looking into multiple things what we do. So I personally believe, and we at Byju are very strong believer that the culture which sits at the heart of technology innovation, right? So if we have the right culture, we have the folks who can always be made curious about what we are doing, and that thing can be put forward. So we kind of created a lot of different programs, like the buddy program, where once the new hire is there, we essentially partner them with the buddy. So that buddy helps them to understand what we are doing in the system, how we are doing it, make them walk through the journey, right? And at the same time, we also ensure that we do a lot of competitive analysis in open forum, also talk to the engineers, so that always create a curiosity in their mind as to what is that they're doing that is different and how we can be leapfrogging and leading most of these things from our perspective as well. And I strongly believe that hiring from the diverse background with different expertise can actually add to the assimilation of what you're trying to build, right? And additionally, we strongly believe that the mentoring of young talent to explore their potential and to streamline their goals as we embark on this journey moving forward. So in a way, I would say what we do at Byju's, which is digital native first, and our culture of how we essentially bring people on board and help them to ramp up, and at the same time create those, I would say, ecosystems where curiosity is at the center of it, I think has worked out very well for us so far. And it's evident into how we have shown different products and have rolled out different products globally.
Thank you, Ritesh. Very interesting. And I totally agree, that you need to have a culture which is pro to learning. And once you have that, things do fall in place. Dallas, the question for you is Coursera is one of the leading learning platforms present today. How do you ensure the relevance of the courses and programs available at the platform amid the rapid pace of change in digital technologies?
Sure, Pooja. First and foremost, I think it was a wonderful perspective, especially in the context of how culture comes ahead of learning, right? Because that actually defines a lot of the outcomes finally, right? The tools and processes can actually support, but without culture, nothing happens. So wonderful perspective from Ritesh. So I'll give you two points of view here. One is in the context of how do you get the right set of curriculum or the right courses or the right training or enablement to an individual, right? The holy grail here is N is equal to 1 in marketing, like we would always say, right? Personalize it to the individual. And how can we get there, right? So we early this year we launched we internally call it as skill sets, and it's a program that we offer to our customers. Now, what does it do? What it does is that we essentially map for a particular job role a set of skills or skill sets that are required, and then it has the next level from an individual perspective where I can actually go and either test myself, or if I have my learning history there, it tells you where you are. And then for that job or the role that I'm currently on, what is the minimum proficiency level that is required, right? I can then see where I am on the context of that frame of saying, okay, a skill, let's say if it is innovation and entrepreneurship as a simple skill, right? In that, if there is a skill around, let's say, finance as a context, marketing as another context, right? Business plan building as a skill. If there are these three skill areas, we can actually map that individual's current skill level based on either an assessment that he does or based on the learning that he has done on the platform to say that here is where you are. Based on job roles, you can actually curate and grade this at different levels. So that's the first step, which is to tell you where you are and where your gap is, or where, even if there is no gap, if you want to go from level X to level Y, what is the next level of skills that you need to acquire? The second part is the curation of the content that goes underneath it, right? Which is moment you get to a level, suppose on the finance side, I am at 35, let's say on a grade of 60 that is required. It will tell you here are the 5 courses that if you do will move you from level 35 to level 60, right? And then it also, from when I hit 60, it tells you that, okay, if you were to do this, you would move from, let's say, a conversant level to an expert level if you move to the level 100, and here are the courses that will take you there, right? So that's the first part of just the content engine that works underneath it, right? So that's where Ritesh is an expert at this, so I'll probably let him talk through this at some point in time when you ask him that, the AI-driven curation of world-class courses, right? So that's the first part. These courses would come from 2 mixes from our university educators as well as the industry educators. So you combine these two, which is the concepts and foundations, and then tools and technologies that come together to define a skill set where we are. The second part is actually the hands-on piece, right? So one is the conceptual learning, assessment, quizzing, all of that, which defines where you have learned. The second part of that skill set is around getting hands-on learning, especially in the context of technology. How do you enable that, right? So that how do you translate what you picked up and move from a level X to level Y with hands-on proficiency, and how can you measure that? So that's where the second part of the platform that comes in that we built are on the hands-on learning. It's called the guided projects that gets attached. It comes with multiples of software tools that is there at the back end of it. People can, and these are again curated back to the courses, right? You do a particular course, it tells here is a guided project that you could do so that you can get hands-on, and thereby your proficiency increases. So 2 parts, as I said, one is on the base definition of where you are, what your skills are, what you need to get to. Second, getting hands-on part of it.
Very interesting, Dallas. Also very comprehensive. You know how you can measure your skill sets, map your movement, go from one point to another. Really amazing to hear that. Ritesh, you direct, coordinate, and manage activities in the engineering department to ensure the development and implementation of efficient operations to meet the current and future need of your company.
Absolutely.
What are the essential skills your teams need to do so? And how are you building those skills?
Interesting. So I think one thing what I realized is in the whole of this situation for EdTech and Byju's, while COVID has changed work dynamics, right? I think we've been lucky to be in the sector of positive relevance in general. Pandemic has created a demand for online learning and brought digitization to the forefront. Now, from the perspective about what kind of skill sets today's workforce needs to be relevant to this current job market, at the same time be relevant to as to how things are evolving, I firmly believe that creative thinking stands at the top, right? I think because going back to the earlier question also, that if your culture actually makes you curious and you are creative enough in terms of thinking, a lot of things essentially can fall right in place for you, because creative thinking can give, I would suggest, a lot of avenues for you to start looking at things differently. Being in a B2C sector, there's tremendous amount of data which is generated. So one of the key skills I believe a lot of people require in today's world is, irrespective of the B2C sector, any sector, data analysis is the key. Engineer or employee should be very good at data analysis in general. And as we are actually seeing a lot of smartphone penetration across the globe, a lot of people actually started using smartphones or tablets. It's very relevant that people do understand mobile expertise, do understand what you need to do in terms of trying to get things, people engage, user engage, getting your retentions much higher. I think having those understanding is going to be good. I'm not trying to get into saying that you should be expert at everything, but having relevant understanding of this subject is very, very critical. In today's world, I think while we're talking about digitization and usage of portable devices, what remains very critical is also how do you engage the customer and how do you keep that engagement relevant and you stand out in the crowd from the UI UX perspective. So that becomes another skill set, in my view, is the UI UX skill set in general. Well, all this thing happens, people are always concerned about privacy, they're concerned about security, and they're concerned about where is my data going. So having people understand and implement the right technologies for you, both from the networking and information security point of view, is very critical in my view. So to sum it up, a creative thinking, data analysis, mobility expertise, having a UI UX relevance, and then be able to understand the networking and information security, I believe these are very, very critical in today's world.
Thank you, Ritesh, and thank you for recounting the skill sets that the teams need in today's workplace. So Dallas, over to you, and I would ask you, how would you bridge that skill gaps based on what your current talent pool has and where they need to go?
Sure. I think first and foremost, I think wonderful exposition again by Ritesh, right? So he makes my job a lot easier by you asking that question. So thank you, Ritesh. The step one, I think, as I said, first is that compendium of skills and figuring out where people are, right? So which I spoken in terms of the first question, the knowledge of where you are in the context of skills, and then charting out a journey, which is second. The second dimension that I would typically bring here is in the context of where you need to go, right? Which is where the future, where emerging areas, emerging skills, right? So one of the things that we, as in the context of the work that we do, is that we get to see, by working with industry partners and by working with the educators that we have, we tend to get that visibility of what is going on. So as by virtue of being on a platform, that's probably a big advantage that we always have, right? So, and then you enable that back capability back into the content, either through your educator resources or through your industry resources. So that's the first part of which is at a future skills context. So we publish annual report called Global Skills Report, GSR, which should be due anytime now, sometime in September, October. And every year we publish what is current skills, where are the teams today, what is it that people are learning right now, and where the future of the skills would be. Around this, we work very closely with World Economic Forum. And some of the skills taxonomy work that WEF has done is something that we have collaborated with extensively on that. And we work with them around the future of skills aspect as well. Of course, in India, we have NASSCOM doing something similar with future skills as well. Right? But if I were to summarize the future of skills, we typically say there are two broad aspects, human and digital, right? So some of the aspects that Ritesh spoke about, data analysis, mobile experience, UX, UI, UX, cybersecurity. So they are all emerging more and more as very critical digital skills. And even in professions which are not necessarily technology. Right? So some of the skills are getting embedded in other professions, in accounting, right? For example, data analysis, security, or ability to actually do forensics has started becoming software forensics has become embedded into accounting as a profession, right? We wouldn't have imagined that at one point in time. Of course, there are tools and technologies available, but the fact is those skills are becoming and technology is becoming ubiquitous across many professions, right? Similarly, the reverse is also happening. We're starting to see soft skills coming into technology, right? Be it designers, be it sociologists, we have anthropologists coming into these functions where you're starting to combine the human part element of the skill that is required to enable many of the technologies to be adopted and successful. So I will say these are the two frameworks, human and the digital part. They obviously change. There is always a context as well, right? In the context when we saw that when the pandemic was at its peak, the highest demand courses were around managing self, right? There was about managing stress and coping with the environment. Some people wanted to study more about being safe, right, around safety. So you started seeing there is also a context sometimes that I was speaking this morning to a couple of my customers in Australia, and Australia is probably going through a very hard lockdown right now in Sydney, right? And they were saying that there is a lot of mental what do you call, I won't call it mental skills, but in terms of strengthening of the mental readiness of people in coping with the lockdown, right? Because they were in a position where a few weeks back that they thought they had they were one of the few countries that recovered faster, but now they're going through the other side, right? And vaccination was low, but at the same time, resilience is something that they are coping up with, and there's a huge demand for courses on resilience that has come in. So I'll say context also comes in at times when it comes to what skills people want to pick up.
Sure, Dallas, thank you. And, surprising, just because they had one COVID case, one positive case, they had to go on a lockdown. So I think that must have been very disturbing for people. Ritesh, the next question for you is that with Generation Z making a grand entry to the workforce, so what kind of growth and learning opportunities are you creating for them? And that should also help them to stay and, be retainable, because it's very difficult to have longevity with this generation.
Absolutely. And I think with that question, I'm thinking more about what is the most relevant thing I've seen in the current journey as well. And I think if I look at Byju's, most of our team today is an average or median around 23 to 24. So drawing my experiences from there would be a good way of saying what are the Gen Z traits I personally see right now. Again, I'll let Dallas also comment on that, because he would also see a lot of people coming on board on the Coursera and trying to see what they're doing. But specifically from my experience, I think if I just have to map the Gen Z experience, I believe they are digitally native. I mean, they are not like adopting digitization like our generation used to do, but they're digitally native. They love open and transparent communication. I think they want to be very crystal clear and cutthroat on their communication as well. definitely needs interesting work and with right recognition. It's very critical for them. They are more entrepreneurial than any of the generation I have seen personally, because they obviously want to have that freedom to think, freedom to do things. And they remain highly competitive, but amazingly collaborative. And that's something which is very different about them, whereby they can compete but be collaborative and make certain things successful. Now, if I look at the same thing within our overall Byju's ecosystem, we actually have a very good retention rate in terms of, and very low attrition on this. That means we are doing something right. If I take a thought model back and try to understand what are the certain key things we are doing, which makes it very, very relevant for the young generation to have Byju's as a brand for where they work, is definitely one thing is the entrepreneurship. There's an entrepreneurship which essentially is embedded into the culture. And this goes for anybody. It doesn't matter where you are. If you believe certain things and this has to be explored and will bring value back on the table, absolutely go ahead, do that. And that resonates very well with the young generation, that they have the freedom to do things. There's been a lot of candid conversation and the one-on-one with the manager where most of the open feedback is provided. I think that also makes them very relevant because they see a channel, clear channel for communication. And being the biggest part of the biggest edtech digital brand, and then the R&R driven culture is the testimonial how well Byju's has adapted and welcomed the changes at par with the workforce in general. And while the journey is not yet over, I'm not saying that we exactly have cracked the model, but being agile to the generations coming in, being adopting and evolving a culture to suit to their needs, and at the same time being inclusive for their growth. I think we are on the right track. And most of these traits, what I've seen, are purely from the experience, what I've seen around across me in this journey as well.
Ritesh, your excitement about working with Generation Z really came through. You know, I could just see the changing colors on your face. It really came through. And I'm sure with the amount of freedom and flexibility that you're giving them is the reason for, you know, a lot of innovation coming from your organization. So we just have time for one last question, Dallas, quickly. What would you say would be the key criteria to measure the success of learning initiative taken by any organization?
Sure. So Pooja, I think I always link it to finally an organization's learning framework, right? So typically the least mature, and I will call in the context of digital learning, is one where you typically have an open learning framework where you put out a content, build a catalog, push it to people, and then expect them to impact their own skills, right? In such scenarios, the typical metrics L&D teams measure there is number of hours an employee has spent on training, right? So, but at a very early stage of maturity of an organization, maybe that's the right thing to do. An open learning framework. If you have never done digital learning, you are pivoting, that's probably the first thing to do, right? In some cases, organizations do this across different segments of the employees. Some segments of the employees you want open learning, and another segment you will do different type of learning. The second one, which we typically talk about, is more guided learning, which typically is where you're trying to up-level skills in specific targeted areas of an organization, right? I know Ritesh spoke about a little while about data literacy being embedded in every job. So you, in such scenario, you want everyone to pick certain skills or certain amount of minimum literacy in an area. We typically call that as guided learning. And in that scenario, the metrics that is typically measured is course completions or certifications, right? So I've got so many people certified on data, I've so many people completed this particular module. So that they are normally good metrics to measure in a guided learning scenario. The one which we see more and more evolving, and in the context of where there is a lot more business outcome driven, is where you are linking skills to job outcomes, where you have mapped your skills under your particular role, and then underneath you have proficiencies that impact a job outcome. Since in those scenarios, your measurements are typically directly correlated with job outcomes, right? So productivity of an employee, right? If he does something pre versus post, how has that changed? So there was a survey that we had done with one of our customers along with IDC, and we had, and these results I'm sure will vary with different companies. And this particular cohort set of companies that they had measured, they got something in the tune of 750% ROI. Now that's a very simplistic view of saying that, okay, training gives 150% ROI. But more importantly, the way they measured it was in the context of could they increase the number of employees to get trained, right? By virtue of the way the program done in the pre-digital learning to the post-digital learning area. Another area they started measuring was there an increase in employee retention and reduction in attrition, right? So that was something in that cohort set, we saw something to the tune of 38% reduction in employee attrition rate. The second part is build versus buy of skills. How much of skills can you acquire through hiring versus how much can you build internally? It's always, much cheaper to do internal skill building, right? So in this cohort set, on an average, each customer saved close to about $1.2 million of savings just by building those skills internally, right? Then, of course, another very unique metric is career development. We finally, you want skills to impact people in such a way that they do their jobs better. And people are always motivated to upskill so that they can have career mobility, right? So there was a 20% increase in career mobility that was measured. There was a productivity impact in terms of productivity per learner pre and post. There was almost about close to 36% increase in this, right? Then there are other productivity, simple training metrics like reduction in the number of instructor resources needed, which was about 40% down, 24% reduction in training cost, or the time to complete, a set of trainings were reduced by some 45%. So there are various frameworks. And in most scenarios, you will probably see a blended of these between these outcome-driven ones that I spoke in the end versus the early stage ones, depending on the cohort set. The best would be where you can actually, for an organization, curate it in the context of where you have a capability-driven organization model around capabilities that define the skill sets. Under the skill sets, you actually know skills proficiency of your employees, and then you can actually measure increase in employee proficiency to company performance, right? There was one, just to summarize, there was a study that we did, which was just a simple correlation where we said the companies which focused a lot more on skilling tended to have better stock performance, right? So this was published in our global skills report last year. There will be a refreshed one that will come out, as I said, in a couple of months. And there was a direct correlation of companies that spend more on employee skilling from in-house tended, and especially on digital skills, tended to have better stock performance than the others.
Thank you, Dallas, for so patiently explaining us all the possible metrics to measure learning outcome. With this, we have come to an end of this fireside chat on Thought Leadership series on mapping the business impact of learning. Thank you, Ritesh. Thank you, Dallas, for joining in for this fireside chat.